Thank you, Bryce. Uh, will you pray with me, please? Lord, let us each find in these words this morning, in this message, the wisdom that we need to hear from you. Amen. Wouldn't you like wisdom to meet you in every thought? This morning's Hebrew scriptures contain this description of wisdom as a part of each of us, divine intelligence, personified as a woman. She goes about seeking those worthy of her, and she graciously appears to them in their paths and meets them in every thought. Wisdom is radiant. She hastens to make herself known to those who seek her. Wisdom, or Sophia in the Greek, is one of the cardinal virtues. This is woman wisdom, wisdom as a principle personified as a woman. This was a popular motif, especially in the Greek culture of the 2nd century BCE. And our biblical legacy of Hellenized Judaism contains this image prominently here in the Wisdom of Solomon, as well as other parts of the Hebrew Scriptures and the New Testament. Woman wisdom was said to be beside God when the world was created. She was by God's side like a master builder, according to Proverbs 8. The blueprint of God's mind, expressed through creation. Wisdom lays the foundation of our world. These images of wisdom arrayed in radiance remind me of Gerard Manley Hopkins' poem, "The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil." It's a wonderful image. And the most stunning part of this tribute to wisdom is that wisdom is available to those who seek her, to us. Good judgment, experience, insight, wisdom that speaks with sobriety, patience, and fortitude. Wisdom expressed in creativity, harmony, and balance. A wisdom we need now more than ever. And she is waiting for us at the gate. If only we would look for her. This image of wisdom is juxtaposed this morning with a troubling parable. The story of the 10 bridesmaids, or virgins as most translations have it. 5 were wise, according to the story, and 5 were foolish. I've seen this translated, 5 were clever, and 5 were morons. It's a little harsh. The plain meaning of this parable seems to be prepared. You never know when the bridegroom is coming. If he shows up late and you happen to be out buying oil for your lamp, you are out of luck. Better to keep your lamps trimmed and burning, as the song says. And thank you, Ethan and Jim. You did a fabulous job with that. And clearly, this interpretation of the parable made sense in the time when Matthew's gospel was written. The small community of Jesus' followers was trying to understand the fact that Christ had not returned as quickly as they expected. The concept that Jesus would come at an unexpected time, perhaps later than anticipated, made sense in the context of a persecuted community waiting for their Lord's return. In this view, Jesus, of course, is the bridegroom. The wise bridesmaids are those who kept alert for his return, and the foolish are those who are unprepared. And if you are comfortable with this interpretation of the parable, you may want to go grab some coffee now. But if you feel like me that there may be a way to hear that, then please keep listening. In our culture, we put a lot of emphasis on being prepared. I remember being a Girl Scout, and our motto was, "Be prepared." I always admired the person who would pull out just the needed item, like a Swiss Army knife or a rain poncho, and say, "Aha, I have just what is needed in the moment. An umbrella, a pair of socks, a snack, in case there's a delay." So most of my life, I have tried to be prepared. And so I admire those smart bridesmaids for thinking, well, what if the bridegroom is delayed? I'll bring some extra oil just in case. But what about the foolish bridesmaids? I'm sure there have been many times I forgot to bring a snack and someone was willing to share. In some ways, it seems downright unchristian of the wise bridesmaids not to share their oil. And I'm not sure if this story is so realistic. And no doubt this parable was written down by a man from a man's perspective. Because if you talk to young girls, and I spoke with both my daughters, 18 and 22, about this parable, I'm pretty sure this is not how things would have gone down. You see, young girls in community are taught to share. And maybe there is a little social pressure to not be mean or selfish or what is being called wise in today's parable. In the social economy of young women, the wise choice may have been to share. They were all part of the same friend group. They were all living in the same village. And according to wedding customs of the first century, there was a period of waiting for the groom to return. In those days, a betrothal took at least a year. First, the bride and groom agreed to marry, then the groom went off to build a house for his future wife, then he returned to claim her. But that's not when the feast took place. He would return, having prepared a place for his bride, and then together they would go off and consummate the marriage. Then they came back together for the big feast. Now, I don't pretend to be an expert on ancient wedding traditions, but it does seem likely that either the bride would have been with her 10 best friends, or her friends are waiting for her to come back with her new husband for the feast. So something's a little off about this story. But let's examine the thinking of the so-called wise bridesmaids. The foolish were not expecting the groom, or bride and groom, if you accept the theory I propose, to be off for so long, so they didn't bring any extra oil. That's understandable. They weren't good Girl Scouts, but it's a mistake anyone could make. All of them, regardless of their intelligence and foresight, fall asleep. Because this fellow is so late in returning, for whatever reason, as a reader we're not told. When awakened from their slumbers, the groggy and less prepared women ask their friends to share the oil. The 5 who brought extra say, no, we cannot share. What if we run out of oil as a result of sharing? Why risk it? So was this truly a wise response? There's a lot to unpack here, and I think we can all be sympathetic with the so-called wise ones who don't share. I'm sure we've all been asked to share something we were smart enough to think of providing for ourselves. And I've got to say, it can be a little annoying, and maybe we too have suggested to someone, the store is open, go buy your own. I remember early in the quarantine when my neighbor Roseanne came by. My neighbor Roseanne is a woman of 70 plus years of Greek descent. You may have seen her around town. She's vision impaired, but she drives a moped with a long mane of white hair flying behind her. She rides up to the North Shore Publix or the local gas station to get her supplies. When the quarantine first started, Roseanne approached me about something, about toilet paper. She was about to run out. Now, I was well provided for in the paper goods department. I was quarantining with both my daughters, Marley's boyfriend from college, and my husband. I'm embarrassed to admit, my first thought was, what if we run out of toilet paper at our house? But I want to turn this around. Instead of asking, what if we run out? Ask ourselves, what if we share? What if we share our resources with those who have less? What if we make room for the stranger, the refugee? What if the fortunate nations share with the developing countries? Because isn't that what God has taught us to do? And isn't that the message of the second great commandment, to love our neighbor as ourselves? We just talked about this 2 weeks ago, although it does feel like 2 years since I last preached. What if we run out is a question based on fear, on scarcity thinking. What if we share brings about a change in our approach? Maybe there is a creative solution here that no one has thought of. And that's where we come back to woman wisdom, Now, wisdom can seem like this abstract philosophical ideal, but wisdom, as personified as a woman, becomes this embodied principle that underlies the created universe. Wisdom is the blueprint of life on this planet, God's creative mind embodied in creation, a creative mind that expresses itself in loving ways in solving life's problems. And let me reiterate here that all human beings share qualities that are considered masculine and feminine. These are universal qualities available to us all. And this particular way of seeing wisdom as woman gives us insight into the qualities of wisdom. Wisdom speaks in our bodies, and we ignore it at our peril. The body has a wisdom that signals when we are out of balance, like the woman who was going through a divorce and a job change at the same time. She had a little acne on her ear. She ignored it, grew larger still, and still she ignored it. Finally, it became a cyst that grew so that her ear expanded in size. It was like the body crying out, "Please listen, slow down." Her doctor diagnosed her with stress and exhaustion. When she listened to her body and took some time to rest and recharge, the cyst went away on its own. Wisdom speaks in our natural world. Earth has wisdom. And if her wisdom is ignored, she will act out with a louder and louder voice in climate change, in pandemics and fires, and in hurricanes. For so long, our society has elevated power and domination of Earth over care for the Earth, violence as a way to resolve issues, using resources unwisely, not thinking of future generations, but only of current profits and markets. Wisdom speaks with creative solutions. We often hear, "There's enough food to feed the world." We produce more than enough food, yet 821 million people are considered chronically undernourished. Issues with distribution and violence prevent this food from reaching the people who need it. The World Food Program uses ingenuity and education to change farming practices and create abundance. For example, in India, heavy use of chemical fertilizers had degraded the soil. A program known as Net Budget Natural Farming has allowed local farmers to recondition the soil and bring organic practices to their local populations. The program will be in use in 6 million farms in India by 2024. This is wisdom, loving, practical, and intelligent, bringing wise practices to the stewardship of resources and working with the natural rhythms of the planet, coming up with creative and often unexpected solutions. Wisdom speaks with compassion and empathy, and wisdom is earned through grief and suffering. As the oft-quoted ancient Greek tragedian wrote, "He who learns must suffer, and even in our sleep, pain that cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart. And in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom to us by the awful grace of God." Wisdom speaks in an embrace of the qualities of compassion and empathy, and a rejection of chaos and division. God speaks through the wisdom of science and human invention, providing new ways to use even limited resources to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, and to heal the sick, insisting that there is enough to share. We can keep our lamps trimmed and burning brightly with ingenuity and kindness. We can be prepared, be wise, and be loving. This means stepping out of fear and into trust, ignoring some of the what ifs that often plague us into not acting wisely and courageously for the good of others. Let's not limit wisdom and her possibilities. Let's listen when wisdom speaks. She speaks in each one of us. And I would challenge us each to look within for that wisdom this week, to see how it can be expressed in our thoughts, words, and deeds. Wisdom is the very intelligence of God, a wise mind available to each of us to employ for the good of ourselves and others. Wisdom speaks, urging each of us to do our part to care for ourselves, one another, and this earth. Let's listen for the voice of wisdom. She is waiting at the gates of our hearts to open us to the sharing of ourselves. Amen.